There's a vacancy on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, formerly held by Judge Geer, who resigned. It's a vacancy. It's an open race this November, and if you vote on the North Carolina ballot, you can select the replacement. Joining me now are the two candidates hoping to be the next judge on the Court of Appeals, Margaret Eagles and Hunter Murphy. Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you very much.
By virtue of a coin flip, you go first, Miss Eagles. Tell me about your experience in litigation, in law, that make you, in your opinion, qualified to serve us on the Court of Appeals.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having us. I am a district court judge currently in Wake County, have been since 2009, where I handle cases in both criminal, civil, and juvenile court. I started my legal career as a judicial assistant, clerk, research assistant, we call it different things, for Justice George Wainwright on the North Carolina Supreme Court. I then became an assistant attorney general with the North Carolina Department of Justice, where I litigated environmental cases as well as represented the state in appeals, criminal matters, to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. And then I went into private practice, where I was a civil litigator, handling cases in district and superior court throughout counties in central and eastern North Carolina. I'm enjoying my work here at the district court level. I'm currently the lead domestic violence judge in Wake County, where I handle cases in both criminal and civil. I also have received my juvenile certification when I presided in the abuse, neglect, and dependency courtroom. And I feel that I am very qualified to serve on the Court of Appeals and hope to join that court.
Mr. Murphy, same question to you. Your work as a lawyer, as a judge, is working in the system. What makes you qualified to sit in this seat if voters decide to hire you?
Well, thank you. I think what makes me well suited for this is my history of success at the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Won my first case there when I'd only been practicing for 7 months, and since then had a great deal of success at the Court of Appeals. I've had, throughout my practice, represented people in all walks of life, in all types of cases. Civil litigation is where I spend a great deal of my time, also representing people in criminal cases and at all levels of our courts here in North Carolina. I've practiced district court, superior court, North Carolina Court of Appeals. We had one case go up to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but I've also practiced before the tribal courts of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and the federal court in the Western District of North Carolina in Asheville. So I have a wide background in my practice, but Court of Appeals is where it is for me. That's where my passion lies. During law school, I had the opportunity to study under United States Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, and during that experience, I really got to understand what the role of an appellate judge was, what mark they can make in society, and what role they should have. I think that the role of an appellate judge is to sit there, interpret the cases that come before them, not to set social policy, follow the Constitution, and make sure that while you're being fair and addressing the case in front of you, you're writing opinions that are clear enough to be interpreted across the state for decades to come.
Let's follow up on that. You skimmed over that, the role of doing that appellate work, totally different than presenting before a court of appeals. Go deeper into that role. What should appellate work look like? How would you perform if given the job?
What I would do in the job is, at the Court of Appeals, you have folks that work with you, and you gather as much as you can in terms of research. But one of the main things you need to do is make sure there's not already another case on point. Talk to your colleagues, make sure that there aren't competing cases, because the last thing we need, and unfortunately we get it occasionally, is competing opinions. And that's the worst thing. When a lawyer goes into court and hands the judge one case that says one thing, other attorney hands them a case that says the other, and they're both right, and they both have the precedential value. So making sure that we have a clear, concise message coming out of the Court of Appeals, I think, is of extreme importance.
And Ms. Eagles, he comes up with a whole different level, different type of experience. Mm-hmm. You're on the bench. How do you see the role of doing the appellate work, of becoming the appeals judge, should the voters decide to elect you to the position?
Well, I think I would be an excellent addition to the Court of Appeals. I'm dedicated to the rule of law. I'm steadfast in my respect for the public trust, and I'm committed to impartiality for all who appear before me. That is how I serve my role on the district court bench, and I would continue on the Court of Appeals. You're correct that the Court of Appeals is a completely different role than the district court, because you do have to take matters and usually make a determination either de novo or whether there's an error. You do need to make sure that we're bound by the statutes as written, unless they're in violation of the North Carolina or the United States Constitution. We're also bound by by precedent from the United States and the North Carolina Supreme Court, as well as other opinions from the North Carolina Court of Appeals. And you do have to be very aware of that when you're taking into a very studied and lengthy examination of those things, while at the same time recognizing that there's a significant number of other cases that have to be heard as well.
Talk to me about public trust. You brought that up. Ring a bell with me. I follow the legislature, and they pass a bill, and the other side doesn't like it. They sue to try to get the law thrown out, whichever law that may be. I won't touch on that because it's not the forum for that. But public trust. When I go to the average person out there and I say public trust and a Court of Appeals judge, what does it mean to you? What should they think when they look at you?
Understand is that I take my role as a judge very seriously. I take my judicial oath as very seriously, and I respect the roles of all people to have their matters heard in a fair and impartial way. Understanding is that I may not like a law, but as long as it is the law of the land, that is what has to stand unless it is in violation of the North Carolina or the United States constitutions. And that is where I believe that you have to acknowledge the public trust, is that I'm taking on a huge role on the second highest court in the state, and recognize that in terms of my evaluation of those cases, not as my own opinion or what I wish the law would be, but what the law is.
Tell me about public trust, Mr. Murphy. What does it mean to you? What should it mean to voters who look at your candidacy as they decide who to vote for in this race?
Well, it means a great deal to me. The public trust is all the court system has. Mm-hmm. The court system has its special role in our society because of that public trust. If you're going to trust 3 Court of Appeals judges to go into a room and decide a case, you need to know that they're deciding that case based on its merits. Mm-hmm. And especially if a Court of Appeals judge is going to sit there and declare a law passed by the legislature as unconstitutional, you need to know that they're going in there without any personal agenda or political agenda. So keeping that trust is of the extreme importance, and just setting aside laws that you don't like just because you don't like them is not the role of a Court of Appeals judge.
How do you think voters, the ordinary public, see justices and judges at this point? There was a time it was nonpartisan. It technically still is. And now it doesn't seem that way to many people. In fact, political types are watching the judge races as much as they are any political races. What does that do to you as a candidate? I'll ask you the same question, but it's your turn. What does it do to you to say, I'm walking that fine line in a nonpartisan race?
It's very hard. It truly is. The ballot this year, as a change, is going to show that I'm a registered Republican. That's what it'll show on the ballot. It'll show our party affiliations for the Court of Appeals races, which is new and is challenging, because while I think it helps to tell people what my party is and what my background is, I don't think people should assume just because somebody's a Republican or somebody's a Democrat that I've got to go out and vote for that party. I think people need to go look at the judges, look at their background, find out who they are and what they're about. Because I think, unfortunately, we are running the risk. Luckily, it hasn't seeped in at the state level as much as it has at the federal, but we're sadly getting close to having our judiciary turn into a third political branch of government, and we can't afford that.
Ms. Eagles, it's a very uncomfortable question to ask a judicial candidate, but yeah, you're associated with parties now, and when you weren't, you still were. What does it do to you as a candidate when people look at you and they may think, oh, she's associated with this team versus that team politically, even though you're sitting on a bench weighing in on law and issuing verdicts?
You just have to be careful and reassure them that regardless of what political party, or if you're not affiliated with a political party, has nothing to do, I know it has nothing to do with my determination and my role as a judge. Anyone who's seen me in district court would be able to say that I'm not pro-state, pro-defendant, pro-plaintiff, pro-defendant in any of these circumstances in civil or criminal court. You just do the best you can and have a pattern and a reputation, hopefully, of being dedicated to the rule of law. We're following the rule of law regardless of whether we like it or not, and making sure you have set an example consistently and continually to show folks that I can't assure you, I can't talk about these issues that everybody wants to talk about. Anything that could appear before me, I could never comment on, because that might in any way give someone the impression that I'm anything but impartial, and I am. And so that's the best thing you can do. That's probably the reason not very many people pay attention to Court of Appeals races, because we don't get to talk about the hot button issues, but we're not supposed to, and it's inappropriate for us to.
What's the best way for a voter to vet any candidate for Court of Appeals, not just you, but you can speak for yourself, when they're trying to figure out who to vote for, because you're right. We're not chasing your opinion. It's not a debate. This is a discussion. So what's the best way to do homework?
Well, I'd say I agree with Mr. Murphy, is that look at our background, look at our experiences, also look at who has endorsed our candidacy. I'm lucky enough to have several former Chief Justices of the North Carolina Supreme Court who've endorsed my candidacy, both Burley Mitchell and Jim Exum, to former Court of Appeals Chief Judges Gerald Arnold and John Martin have also endorsed my candidacy, as well as Judge Geer, who just recently vacated the seat, has endorsed my candidacy. Also, talk to your friends and neighbors. See who knows us and has had experience with us in court. That's the best way to do it, but really looking at our background and experience and determining who is the most qualified person for the seat.
Doing homework on your candidacy, determining your qualifications to sit in that seat. What's the best way to go about it?
Best way to go about it for my race and for my position is you can go to huntermurphyforjudge.com. On there, we've posted all the cases we've worked on the Court of Appeals, all the briefs we've written to the Court of Appeals, so you can get an idea of what my writing style is, what my take is on different issues that I've felt the need to take to the Court of Appeals. And I agree. You look at who's endorsed our candidacy. Last weekend, I was glad to hear I was endorsed by the North Carolina Fraternal Order of Police. Very proud of that, as well as the day I announced my candidacy, Justice Bob Orr came out and endorsed my candidacy. So I'm very proud to have many endorsements, and those are things that can help filter people to where they need to be. But I know that the folks watching today are going to do their homework. They've tuned in tonight, but please go to our websites, read our opinions, read what we've worked on, and learn a lot more about us.
So many, in previous cycles, judicial candidates would never have an opinion out there. Obviously, you're encouraging people to read your opinion. Does past opinion guarantee future opinions if you get a chance to opine on the same topics that you once were on the other side of the bench?
No, I don't believe it does. It doesn't guarantee anything. When you're sitting as an attorney, when I'm writing a brief, I'm advocating for my client. However, you can get a good look at our legal reasoning skills. And that's what you need in a judge. You need to know how he or she is going to look at a case, how he or she is going to analyze a case, and eventually what type of opinion they'll end up issuing.
Ms. Eagles, people do their homework on the candidates. Sometimes they're paid to do opposition research. If we dug into the past, your decisions in the past, how you served on the bench, is past decisions indicative of future decision making?
No, because ultimately each case is different, and each case has individual facts, and each case has individual circumstances. And of course, from the time that I started practicing in 2000 till now, some changes have been made to the case law. And so a position that was held, say, in 2001, 2002, 2003 may be different because the Court of Appeals ruled that it was different, or the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled it was different, or the legislature passed a law that it was different. But ultimately, you can look at writing style and skills, but ultimately, as I've told other folks, you're welcome to look at any opinions that I have ever written as a lawyer, but don't assume that that would be how I would make a determination as a judge, because at that point I was acting as an advocate for one side, not as a trier of fact or even an appellate judge making a determination if another judge made it an error or not.
You know, generally speaking, justices and judges are deemed very high integrity officials, the highest in the sphere of public discourse, no doubt about that. But as we look ahead, as we look at the characteristics that we need to see on the appellate court, what's the highest qualification? If there's one thing that stands out, you need this quality to do the best and highest work on behalf of the citizens of the state, what would it be?
The best? It would be, I think it's hardworking and diligent, because you need to make sure that you're paying attention to all the matters that are in front of you, all the elements, the facts, the circumstances, the case law, the precedent, all these things. Diligence, because these cases impact people. They impact not only the matters that are in front of them and the parties that are in front of them, but also many other cases. And so I would indicate that it would be diligence and hard work at paying attention and doing your homework and doing all the research that's necessary.
Mr. Murphy, same question to you on this. The highest qualification that we should look for?
Well, I actually agree with Ms. Eagles that it's work ethic. You have to have the determination to get it right. You can't just pass it on. You can't pass the buck and say, well, I'll let a clerk figure this one out, or I'll let this happen with this case and I'll just work on this. You have to be focused on every case, because every single case is somebody's life. By the time they get to the Court of Appeals, they're 3 or 4 years into this thing, whether it's a criminal case or civil litigation or termination of parental rights. These affect every case affects multiple lives. And to not give it 100% is unacceptable.
Tell me about getting it right. You have to sit there until you get it right. What do you mean?
Well, you have to sit there, you have to do the homework, you have to do the research, you have to read the cases, but you have to bounce it around with your colleagues. The Court of Appeals sits in panels of 3 judges at any given time, and you have to have that exchange of ideas. No matter if you disagreed with that judge on a case 5 minutes ago, now you're dealing with this case, and they may have something you really need to hear. So you need to sit there, get through all of it, hammer it out, and be open-minded to admit when your first impression of a case is not the correct answer, and be willing to discuss that. And that's what I think is great about the practice of the Court of Appeals, is that you've got 3 judges really working together to make sure they get that case right.
Ms. Eagles, I'll ask you about getting it right, doing the homework, putting the time in to get the court, get your decision right. I mean, how easy is it? How difficult do you perceive it to be? And if I'm sitting there waiting on your decision, what should I expect?
Well, it's incredibly challenging to get it right, but that's the reason that these jobs are so important, is because you have to have judges in those roles that are willing to do the hard work and put in the extra effort to make sure that, based on the, regardless of what one side or the other side may argue is the point, you have to really review the case and make a determination as to what is the actual element, what's the issue in front of me, and don't get swept up in arguments that are made. You do have to use the assistance of your research clerks, but ultimately it would be, if I was the judge, it's my decision. And so I'm the one that has to make that determination. Consulting with colleagues, et cetera, is helpful and useful, but when it comes down to it, my decision and my determination. And it is a lot of hard work. I don't think anybody fully appreciates, except for us, exactly how much work the Court of Appeals does. They have a huge caseload, and to maintain that diligence throughout is very important, but they're doing it, and I would hope to join them.
If you're elected at the end of your term, how will we know you've done a good job? What criteria should we use to grade you if you join the Court of Appeals?
Once I'm on the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, once you get there, and I'll ask him the same question. We'll move ahead a little bit, a few years. But
I was like,
how do we
right
judge
now?
you're doing a good job, and how do we know to be satisfied that we're being represented in a thoughtful way on the bench if you're sitting in one of those seats?
Honestly, it's as a judge, you realize that at the end of the day, most everybody, you're going to have at least one person who's generally unhappy with you, and that's the nature of an adversarial system and litigation, because the judge sits as the role as the decider. In terms of a Court of Appeals opinion, you'll have sides. I think the way you could determine success is if you have folks who may disagree with you, but they at least respect the fact that you put the work in and respect the reasoning that you put into it. And if you make that determination, even if they're like, I don't agree with you, but I respect that we have a difference of opinion, and I think that would be the surest sign of success.
And you, sir, get the final word. How do we know you've done a good job if voters elect you?
The best way in 2024, when I run for re-election, that you'll know I've done a good job is that you won't have heard anything about me for 8 years. When judges make the news and judges' names are out there, that means something's going on. And I hope I can go hide in my chambers in Raleigh and everyone think that I'm doing a great job. But I think that's really a good indication. If you don't know something about a judge, that means they're not putting themselves out there. They're not trying to make policy. They're not trying to legislate from the bench. And I think that's what's important. And I hope people will keep that in mind for 8 years from now.
That's Hunter Murphy. This is Margaret Eagles. They're seeking the gear seat on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Thank you so much for being on this set and having a great conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Kelly.